All right, welcome everyone. As you're coming in, if you want to throw in the chat where you're coming from, where you're joining us from today. And we will get started here in a moment. All right, let's see. We got College Station, Texas, Savannah, Georgia, Montgomery, Alabama, myself in Atlanta. We have Arkansas, Charlotte in the building. I used to live there for a while. Deerfield Beach, Florida, New Jersey. All right, some more Georgia. Pennsylvania. A lot of Kansas folks coming in. Wonderful. Fort Myers, Florida, Idaho. Hey, St. Louis. Hi, Denise. See, oh, wow. The Arctic Circle, Connecticut. Excellent, excellent. Wonderful. Okay. Well, everybody, again, you could continue to drop in the chat where you are joining us from. Tennessee. I see you in the building. Our presenter is also from Tennessee, but I will go ahead and get started. So, first, I want to welcome everyone. My name is Yasmin Forbes, and I serve as the lead curriculum specialist here at the National Council for History Education. Thank you for joining us this evening for tonight's webinar, which is Beyond the Verdict, the Unintended Consequences of Brown versus Board. Tonight, we will explore the unintended consequences of Brown v. Board, including displacement of Black educators, uneven implementation, and the long-lasting effects on educational equity. You'll engage with oral history clips from community members who experienced desegregation firsthand to deepen your understanding of this complex moment in U.S. history. And guiding us on this journey this evening is our amazing panelist, Jason R. McGowan, and he received his BA in English and MA in liberal arts from Middle Tennessee State University, where he currently serves as the oral historian for the Albert Gore Research Center. He received grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Western National Parks Association, the Tennessee Department of Tourism Development, and the National Park Service's Brown v. Board National Historic Site. Jason was also a proud participant in the inaugural Getting Word Summer Institute at the historic Monticello. He organized the Middle Tennessee African American Oral History Project, the Fight for Equality in Education Oral History Project, the Tennessee Rosenwald School Oral History Project, and the Brown v. Board of Education Oral History Project. Jason had assembled and preserved over 80 interviews that recount the lives and diverse experiences of Black Americans who lived, worked, and attended public schools during the era of legal segregation and the transition to desegregation. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Jason for our webinar on this important topic.
Thank you very much, Yasmin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here just to get prepared. Right. And also, thank you to the National Council for History Education and all who are in attendance. The interviews in this presentation are from my work on the Brown versus Board of Education Oral History Project, which was made possible through a cooperative agreement with the Brown versus Board of Education National Historic Site in Topeka, Kansas, and the Albert Gore Research Center at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. This presentation not only highlights the 5 court cases that changed the world, it also recognizes the resilience of the teachers and administrators in Black educational institutions who worked tirelessly to educate their students despite often facing inadequate resources. Additionally, it acknowledges the essential roles played by families, communities, and churches in supporting the education of Black students. It's a brief history of the 5 cases that became Brown versus the Board of Education. In 1954, the Supreme Court issued what may be considered the most significant decision of the 20th century in Brown versus the Board of Education. The ruling overturned the 1896 decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, which established the doctrine of separate but equal as law of the land. However, its severely and intentionally delayed implementation has left a lasting stain on the United States that is still visible today. Brown versus the Board of Education is unique in that it is the only Supreme Court decision that was not immediately enforced. The court's lack of urgency was evident when it instructed states to desegregate public schools at a pace described as with all deliberate speed. Because of this indifference, many school systems did not begin desegregation until the late 1960s and 1970s. In the years leading up to the Supreme Court's landmark Brown versus Board ruling, African American parents, students, teachers, and community leaders across the country confronted the deep inequalities of segregated schooling. Now, what makes the Brown case particularly noteworthy is that it represents five cases from different regions, all linked to the issue of educational equity. These cases include Briggs versus Elliott out of Summerton, South Carolina, Davis versus County School Board in Farmville, Virginia, Belton and Beulah versus Gebhardt out of Wilmington, Delaware, Bowling versus Sharp out of Washington, D.C., and Brown versus the Board of Education out of Topeka, Kansas, of course. Each case began with extraordinary people who refused to accept the barriers placed on their children, and together they reshaped the nation. Briggs versus Elliott, South Carolina. The movement that would eventually help topple school segregation began in the rural communities of Clarendon County, South Carolina. There, Reverend Joseph A. Delane, together with NAACP activists and local families, including Harry Briggs and the Pearson brothers, Levi and Hamnet, first approached the school board with what seemed like a modest request: funds for a school bus for Black children who were forced to walk miles to school each day. Their request was denied, prompting a deeper legal challenge. Thurgood Marshall and Harold Boulware soon filed a formal lawsuit that would challenge far more than transportation inequality. Their case, initially filed on May 16, 1950, and later refiled that December, confronted the very structure of segregated education. The case brought national attention to the extreme disparities experienced by Black students in the Deep South. Although it was not the first chronologically and even alphabetically, the case would not become the title case, but its courage and sacrifice became a cornerstone for all others. Let's listen to Nathaniel Briggs, Harry Briggs' son, and Joseph Delane as they remember the Briggs case.
And obviously, all the farms are away from the little town we lived in. 6, 7, 8 miles from the school. That community is called Davis Station. I call it Hamlet. Those kids had to walk to school. The county did not provide school buses for their children, their neighbors, or anywhere in that section called in other parts of Clarendon County. The school board said that we Black folks, he didn't use the word, he used the N-word. I don't profess to use that. You didn't make enough, you didn't pay enough taxes for you all to have a school bus. So you walk or your parents took you to school. We only live 150, the Briggs family only live 150 yards from the door of the schoolhouse. So the farmers out in Davis Station vicinities purchased their own school bus out of their money, used school bus, and they asked the school board to at least give us gas money and do the maintenance on it. And the arrogance of the school board said, we're not going to give y'all the N-word, anything. So they couldn't keep up with the maintenance on the school bus. The family sued. The Pearson family sued, and they went to court. They lawsuit was denied because Mr. Levi paid his taxes in one section, but his kids went to school in another district. But technicality, they threw his court threw his case out of court, and they laughed at him. Our school, sometimes you had to bring wood and coal to heat the room. The school building had outside toilets for bathroom. Girls on one side, the guys on the boys on the other side. In my lifetime. So the white school, which is less than a mile away from our school, had all amenities. A gymnasium, had 15 school buses. We had none. So you can see the inadequacy. Schools, laboratories, they was never equal. Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896 says separate but equal. That was the law of the land. So we agreed to, and we didn't make a lot of fuss. We ain't got to go to school with other people, but by law, the schools shall be equal. Equal facilities throughout. I can tell you in Clarendon County, and probably throughout in the South, these schools was never equal. So from 1896 to May 17, 1954, we fell behind. And some folks today will say, y'all not smart enough. Well, if you keep taking away everything that makes me just as smart as anybody else, yes, we're going to fall behind. So you can see an unequal system that existed in Clarendon County.
My father, a minister, Reverend Joseph A. Delane Sr., was born and reared in that community. He moved back to that community when I was about 1 year old, or probably a little less than that. He felt that there was a dedication on his part to help Black folk wherever needed. This is an area where economically it was very poor, white or Black, ill prepared as far as education is concerned. Among the Black community, there were very few literate individuals. And to put it in a nutshell, they were disadvantaged almost in everything that you would expect in a southern state at that time. My father felt that wherever possible, it was his duty to help Black folk. Be that if they were sick, find a hospital or a doctor or someone that had knowledge of medicine to help. If it was law, where could he make contact out of the area for attorneys? This challenge, the constitutionality of that separate but equal has been challenged locally in Charleston by the district. Okay, and there was rumors were flying hot and heavy. Klan was probably coming in, even though there was not a formal Klan group in Clarendon County. There had been guards, Black folk had secretly organized armed guards to protect our house at night without our knowing it, to make sure that we weren't murdered or killed in the house. Mm-hmm. And as I said, I was away in school at the time, and the house was burned.
Davis versus County School Board, Virginia. In Farmville, Virginia, the fight began in the overcrowded halls of the Robert Russa Moton High School. Built for only 180 students, the school strained under a population that had swelled to more than 450 by 1951. Reverend L. Francis Griffin, NAAC president, had long been pushing the county to build a new building, but his pleas were ignored. The movement of change came not from adults, but from the students themselves. The case was named after Dorothy E. Davis, the first to sign the petition. However, it was 16-year-old Barbara Rose Johns who led her classmates in a 2-week student strike. one of the boldest acts of youth activism in the era. The lawsuit that filed on May 23rd, 1951 by NAACP attorneys Spotswood Robinson III and Oliver Hill sought not merely improved conditions, but an end to segregated schooling. Though the lower courts rejected integration outright, they ordered improvements to the Moton facilities. Still, the county resisted every step towards equality. Even after Brown, Prince Edward County chose to close its public schools entirely from 1959 to 1964 rather than integrate. Let's listen to Cornell Walker and Bob Hamlin recall their experiences during the public education shutdown.
She was a teacher, and my mother told me that she wanted to talk to me and go up there and talk to her. And I went up there and she asked me, "Do I want to go back to school?" And I told her, "Of course I did." And she said, "If you want to go, I can get you into a school, but it won't be here in Prince Edward County. You got to leave home to do it." So at 16 years old, I got on a bus. I went to Media, Pennsylvania to stay with a family that I had never seen and didn't know their names until a month ago. I went from an all black to just about an all white school. There were two other blacks in my class. And I think we had a class of 60 some people. But even looking back, that was an experience that made me a little bit better than what I was before. I'm not saying that the closing of the schools did that, but for me, the closing of the schools made me grow up, made me take responsibility, and gave me something which staying in Prince Edward County would not have given me.
I was going into the 12th grade in 1959. And I was concerned because I had made a promise to my mom as I was passing through the seventh grade, because the seventh grade was as high, no, sixth grade was as high as my mom had gone in school. She was in school. That was the high she could go. And so I am, and she used to help me with my homework and that kind of a thing. But she said to me, "Okay, boy, you have gone further than me now. I can't help you, but you have to promise to keep going, because I would be the first in the high school if I kept on going." And I promised my mom that I would. So when they shut the school doors as I'm getting ready to go into the 12th grade, that worried me. But fortunately, down, two local ministers, two local ministers got with a junior college in North Carolina. And one of those local ministers was on the faculty at that junior college. And Kittrell College agreed to accepting some of us from Farmville, Virginia, to come there and finish high school. So they already had a high school curriculum from Vance County, North Carolina. And so they agreed to accepting some of us to come there down to the 10th grade. So 10th and 11th and 12th grades could be done at Kittrell Junior College. So that's where I and 58 others went.
Belton and Beulah versus Gebhardt in Delaware. Delaware's challenge to school segregation emerged through two separate but related stories, those of Ethel Louise Belton and Shirley Beulah. The combined case was argued by Lewis Redding, Delaware's first Black attorney. In the Belton case, Black students from Claymont endured long commutes. Louise Belton herself traveled 2 hours each way to attend Howard High School in Wilmington, the only Black high school in the entire state. The Beulah case centered on 8-year-old Shirley Beulah, who walked to the segregated Hockessin No. 107 elementary school each day. A bus passed directly by her house every morning, but it carried only white children, leaving her behind. Although Redding secured a victory at the state level, the school board appealed. Let's listen as Carol Neff, one of the 12 Black students who integrated Claymont High School, remembers her experience.
So anyway, we're going to Claymont High, and I'm going, oh, so it's a white school, and we're going to integrate the school. Oh, great. There's violence all over the state. I don't want any part of that. I just want to go to Claymont High and get in the orchestra and do sports. So I was pretty upset. But, we always did what our parents told us to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even bother to argue. So my three youngest siblings went to the Arden School, whereas a community like that, no problem. They don't care who you are. If you got approved as a person to live in that community, then everything was, you were part of that community. So got on the school bus that day, and which I was a little nervous about, because what's going to happen when I get off the school bus? Mm-hmm. And got to the school, and I'm looking around. Okay, where are they? Where are the people who don't want us to go to school here? I'm looking behind the trees. I mean, where are they hiding? There's nobody, absolutely nobody. Then I going, okay, when I get off this bus, who's going to protect me? I mean, I didn't want to get off that bus. But, there was nothing.
Bowling versus Sharp out of Washington, D.C. Segregation in the nation's capital fostered overcrowded Black schools while white schools had empty classrooms. Local barber Gardner L. Bishop, driven by frustration and civic determination, organized the Consolidated Parents Group and filed a grievance with the school board. On September 11, 1950, Bishop led 11 Black students to enroll in the newly constructed Sousa Junior High School. They were denied on the spot. Named after Spotswood Bowling, one of the 11 students, the ensuing lawsuit filed in 1951 was dismissed in the district courts, but the Supreme Court chose to hear it alongside the 4 other cases. As Washington, D.C. is not a state, the court ruled on bowling under the Fifth Amendment rather than the 14th, issuing a separate but parallel decision that declared segregation in the district schools unconstitutional. Brown versus Board of Education out of Kansas was named after the assigned lead plaintiff, Reverend Oliver L. Brown. The Kansas case that would eventually give the entire group its name began in Topeka, where Lucinda Todd, a former teacher and powerful advocate for equal schooling, helped organize Black parents frustrated by the district's policies. Students were required to travel long distances to Black elementary schools, even as they passed several white schools located much closer to their homes. When the case was heard in the district court in February 1951, the judges acknowledged the harm caused by segregation, but still upheld the doctrine of Plessy versus Ferguson, ruling that schools were separate but equal. And despite neither being the first case filed nor the most dramatic, Brown became the lead case. Some scholars argue it was a clerical error in alphabetizing. Others suggest that centering a Midwestern case rather than a Southern one like Briggs might soften public backlash by distancing the issue from the violence resistance seen in the Deep South. Terry Crowder provides some
I had an uncle, my uncle Charles. He was kind of heavily involved in that because Mr. Burnett, he was the head of the NAACP at the time, and he was a member of our church, Church of God, and they would have meetings and discussions about the stuff was going on. But with being kids, we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, when I look back at it, and it all comes together while they was having these meetings, and all this discussion, and why they getting certain people together, and how they's going to do the case. So yeah, looking back at it, it all comes together now.
Brown versus Board, the unintended consequences. Though these 5 cases came from different communities, they shared a single unwavering conviction that segregated education was inherently unequal. Each case added its own evidence, its own human stories, and its own moral force. When the Supreme Court issued its unified ruling in 1954 declaring that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal, it stood on the shoulders of these plaintiffs, students, parents, clergy, teachers, and attorneys who had dared to imagine a different future for American children. Now, when we tell the story of Brown versus the Board of Education, we often talk in terms of triumph. The moment that the Supreme Court struck down the immorality of separate but equal, a ruling that was long overdue and one that helped propel the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s. However, in the years that followed the landmark decision, our nation was forced to confront more than just segregated classrooms. We were faced with the consequences that integration brought to Black educators around the South. The ruling promised equality, but the reality that followed was far more complicated. Displacement of Black teachers. As Black schools closed their doors, thousands of dedicated Black teachers, principals, and administrators were pushed out. And not because they lacked talent, dedication, or credentials, but because racism shaped who was deemed fit to lead in a newly integrated schools. We failed to confront the truth that while the decision was just, its implementation was far from it. In the wake of Brown, thousands of Black teachers and principals who often held higher degrees than their replacements were pushed out of their positions solely because of racism. As Black educational institutions closed, Black educators' dismissals followed, and these were not isolated incidents, but the consequence of a system unwilling to accept Black authority in integrated spaces. And also, instead of integration being a two-way street, it became a lopsided absorption into white-controlled educational structures. This image is a letter sent to some Black educators in Topeka, Kansas. It was taken from Jim Crow's Pink Slip, The Untold Story of Black Principals and Teacher Leadership by Leslie T. Fenwick. Due to the present uncertainty about enrollment in schools next year for Negro children, it is not possible at this time to offer you employment for next year. If the Supreme Court should rule that segregation in the elementary grades is unconstitutional, our board will proceed on the assumption that the majority of people in Topeka will not want to employ Negro teachers next year for white children. If it turns out that segregation is not terminated, there will be nothing to prevent us from negotiating the contract with you at some later date. And we must remember also that Black schools were never mere buildings. They were confirmations of community strength, institutions as essential as the family and the Black church. They were places where children were surrounded by positive role models and were encouraged to see themselves as capable, intelligent, and worthy. Next, listen to Wanda Dixon, Cornell Walker, and Demita Whitlock share memories about their teachers.
When you saw them, and a smile would come to your face. You were like, "Oh, this is my teacher," and you felt good about yourself. And they would always. I never. They were always real nice to you, and talk to you in a soft voice, trying to help you, on along your way. However, I will say that they did. Every room had a coat closet, and in the coat closet there was what they called the paddle of education. And so if you did act up, they had no problem taking you back into the coat closet and giving you some education with the paddle. And I never got paddled that I can ever remember or anything, but I knew the paddle, and it hung there so you could see it. So, it wasn't something like you were going to be surprised when you got called to go back there and stuff. And so the teachers, and they always taught you to be respectful. They have us, when we were sitting at our desk, we had to have our hands folded on the desk and sit there quietly. And
Prince Edward County in the 40s, early 50s had 22 black schools in it. Most of them were one-room schools with one teacher teaching 5 different grades. You may question and say, well, how can a teacher do that? The teacher that I had, a lady by the name of Hazel C. Jackson, was the best teacher that I ever had. She taught by the books that we had. She made sure that everybody learned to read, write, and do arithmetic, learn their 3 R's. And for the ones who were a little bit slower in learning, let's say they were in the 2nd, 3rd grade, she would put a 5th grade student with them to help bring them forward. So the technique that Mrs. Jackson used was, I guess, a lot different than today, but she made sure that every student that she had learned.
In my experience at that time, some of the teachers were people that went to my church. So the leaders, I felt like I was with family. They loved us. I felt love. Mm-hmm. So they were strict, if you would think about looking back, but they were strict because they would always tell us, we're teaching you that you have to be 100 times better than white people. They just straight up told us that we were going to have to be 100 times better. So therefore they loved us and they were hard on us.
Despite receiving outdated used books and materials that the white schools disregarded and discarded the moment new funding arrived, Black schools still produced extraordinary scholars supported by exceptional teachers. These educators compensated for the lack of resources with unmatched dedication and skill. Julius Adger and Marguerite Delane comment on school resources.
Grew up, our parents hid a lot of things from us, such as what was happening with the education system as we were going to school even. They did not let us know a lot of this because I think we would have acted on a lot of it a lot different because we would have not put up for that. My mother was a school teacher. My aunts were school teachers right here at Scotch Branch. And the county was a little different back in those days. Those days, we got books from the white school after they had used them. They were second hand down to us, and they got new books to progress on. And matter of fact, I was one of the students with the main custodian back then. He was called a janitor, Mr. Norm Mose Lawson. He would take us over there and load the books on the back of his pickup and bring back over to Scotch Ranch so we could have books to learn with after the whites got through with them. This went on not only through elementary and basically through high school. And I know this is what been going on because when you got the books, they were news, and we had to use those books. But a lot of us proved to learn what we need to learn and get where we need to get in life.
They had used it 8 or so years, and then when they got new books, they sent the old books to us. And they did,
okay.
they did that for a number of years. We always got, and there were lots of times there were writing. There was writing in the books, answers written out in the book, and you know the thing that some of those answers were wrong, but the thing. But the thing that got me was that we had to rent those books. We had to pay rent for those books. I
That
had
was
paper
funny.
and pencil basically because my mother was a teacher.
Mm.
Whatever resources were in those classrooms, it was because those teachers brought them in there.
So when these teachers were displaced after Brown, the loss wasn't just administrative. It was cultural. It was communal. It was intentional and deeply personal. And again, let's be clear, these educators were not inferior. In fact, Black teachers typically held higher degrees and more experience than their white counterparts. Their dismissal was not a matter of qualifications, but of prejudice, revealing systemic bias. Here we have Alan Delane and Clayton Bryce remarking on the education of their teachers.
And but most of them were remarkably well educated.
Mm.
So a lot of them had, at least a master's degree, and some of them had started work on their doctorates. Because they had in the summers they would go up north, because they pay them to go to graduate school up there, and so many of them took advantage of this because some of them had degrees from Columbia and places like that because they go up in the summer, and work on their degrees. And so I worked with folk worked with me who were remarkably well educated.
At Curtis and Monroe, we would get the books that the white schools got rid of. So, and until I went to the 70th anniversary, I thought that the only ones that had educations, well, when they integrated in 54, only 30% of the Black teachers got hired. And I had the opinion that only to teach in a Black school, all you need was a 2-year college degree. But at the 70th reunion, a lot of my peers were saying that these people had masters and doctors.
See, integration in its truest and most just form should have been a two-way street. Yet instead of blending the best of both educational traditions, the system demanded assimilation into whiteness. It is presumed that white educators were inherently superior, a belief upheld by white romantic exceptionalism, a harmful narrative that falsely portrayed white educators as elite while framing Black professionals as less than capable and trustworthy, falsely justifying their removal even when the evidence stated otherwise. Curriculum problems. Black institutions vanished as they were absorbed into white-controlled systems. This shift placed the education of Black students into hands of individuals who did not want them educated, who too often had little interest in nurturing their potential or honoring their humanity and culture. The school system has long failed to cultivate a genuinely inclusive curriculum. I mean, even during my time as a student, we taught basically three themes about Black existence in the United States. That Black people were slaves, not enslaved, but slaves, that Lincoln freed them, and that Martin Luther King secured their rights. See, oversimplifying these rich narratives flattens a rich, complex history into just three narrow chapters. But as you can see, there's hope because oral histories, they allow us to recover the stories often pushed aside. They provide a voice to the mute. Here we have Deborah Caldwell, Terry Crowder, and Vivica Snipe recalling their transitions into white spaces.
It was absolutely horrible.
The
Mm,
teachers didn't like you. They didn't want you to be there. The students didn't like you and didn't want you to be there. You got called the N word every day, and it was hard for a small group of black kids to be in an all white school. It was definitely hard.
When they desegregate, you know, the
mm,
schools, I think we got quality education because the black teachers cared a lot, and they made sure you learn what you're supposed to learn. Well, when you went to the white school, when we went to, yeah, well, Boswell, for instance, teachers they didn't really care whether you got it or not.
mm.
Where when you was in the elementary school with the black, they made sure you got what you was supposed to learn. But when you went to the white schools, they didn't really care. They just passed you on whether you received that or not. You know.
At one time, I thought when I went to college, that would be something that I was really interested in history. But I was probably the first one in my family, and maybe even the first one in several block areas that went to college. So I didn't have anyone to really advise me, what do you do with a history degree? Where do you go with a history degree? And, you know, unfortunately, when we went into an integrated school, and especially when I was in high school, not a lot of the guidance counselors advised us about college. I don't think that they expected us to go to college. Um, I never once met with a guidance counselor that gave me any direction or understanding about how you apply to college or what was available about college. The first time I ever heard anything about going to college was when through Upward Bound.
Mm.
I think the expectations that they had for us as people of color, of black children, where we came from, the part of town that we came from, it was considered low income, poverty. You know, kids like that don't go to college. Your parents don't go to college. Um, that wasn't an expectation that they had for any of us. Never any advice towards college.
National concerns emerge. By 1971, the situation had grown so dire that the United States Select Senate Committee on Equal Education Opportunity convened to investigate the rapid decline in Black educators. But this decline did not just affect employment statistics, it affected communities. It reduced the number of Black people in positions of authority, fewer Black leaders, fewer mentors, and fewer academic role models for young Black students to emulate. And with that loss comes another, the diminishing number of Black children who might see themselves as future educators. This image, taken from Jim Crow's Pink Slip, The Untold Story of Black Principal and Teacher Leadership by Leslie T. Fenwick, just shows some of the numbers that were highlighted from an amicus curiae brief to the Senate Select Committee. Just to highlight a few, Alabama from 1968 lost 204 Black teachers. They increased their white teachers by 512. Florida from the same period, they gained 768 Black teachers. However, they also increased white teachers by 2,965. Georgia in 1968 lost 526 Black teachers, increased white teachers by 1,086. Those Black teachers who did make the transition noticed resounding differences in teaching experiences and expectations and rewards. Let's listen as Marguerite Delane juxtaposes her position as a teacher during this time.
Even those teachers who were not from there, you were expected to live in that community. That was an expectation. And even when I went to work, um, I lived in the community. Okay. And when I started working, it was still all Black. But I was expected to live in that community. And I did. I started working in Hampton County, and I lived in that community for the year. The next year that I worked, I was in Georgetown County, and it still was all black. As a matter of fact, I was in Somerville, gosh, I don't know how many years, must be 5 or 6 years before I had taught, must be about 7 or 8 years before the schools were integrated. So I started working in an all black community, in an all black environment also. But the difference that I saw was that the teachers went to church with you.
Mhm.
Okay. The
Mhm.
teachers, you met them on the streets. They knew your parents and you knew theirs. I mean, you knew them, your parents knew them. So there was not a disconnect. Okay. They participated in the church, most likely that you attended or one thereby, but they were, you interacted in the grocery store or whatever stores you were in the community. So there was a camaraderie
Mhm.
among the teachers and among the community. Most likely your teachers were the ones who directed your Easter plays and your Christmas plays and whatever at church and at school. So there was a togetherness, and you got to know, most of them got to know which teacher would mistreat, okay, and which teacher would not.
Mhm.
Now, we and most of the time those teachers stayed in those communities for years. So there was a sense of belonging and also sense of knowledge when we were integrated. The first year we were integrated, the superintendent came to our November meeting, because then all the teachers would meet together every month. Came to our November meeting and made this announcement: we are not going to be able to give the teachers the usual $250 Christmas bonus this year because we just don't have the money. Black teachers had never, ever gotten a Christmas bonus.
Today, we frequently speak of diversity as a sign of progress, a milestone. However, diversity alone is not an indicator of progress. It is only a starting point. Alone, diversity is simply an achievement without progress. Progress is measured by inclusion and sustained socioeconomic growth and equal access to resources. While diversity is an indicator of achievement, inclusion is a more accurate measure of genuine change and progress. If we are serious about building an educational system that honors all children, then we must confront not just the legacy of segregation, but the legacy of what followed, the erasure of Black leadership in education. And we must work together to restore what was taken. Today, as we reflect on this era, we are called not only to understand the past, but to confront its legacy. The story of displaced Black educators after Brown reminds us that progress is never guaranteed, not even by a Supreme Court ruling. It must be protected, nurtured, and fought for. And so we carry forward the lessons of those students and educators, those who were pushed aside, yet whose contributions laid the foundation for generations. We honor them not with silence, but with action, with a commitment to the building of an educational system that values equity, representation, and the full humanity of every student and every teacher. I hope that you use this as a starting point to learn more about these cases and more about this time and era in our state's history, in our United States history. Come back and look at this. Here are some references to get a good starting point. Going directly to the Brown v. Board Education site. Richard Kluger's book is awesome. You see Leslie Fenwick, great starting points for you there. Also, I want to thank, of course, the Brown versus Board of Education National Historic Park in Topeka, Kansas, where Ranger Jim Williams is superintendent, the Albert Gore Research Center, where Dr. Louis M. Karakoutis is the director, Yasmin Forbes, and the National Council for History Education. Thank you for having me, and for all of the fantastic narrators who gave so freely of themselves. Couldn't have done it without you. I appreciate everyone.
Now we will, thank you so much, Jason. That was amazing. And we will shift to some Q&A. We do have a question in the chat so far. If anyone else wants to ask a question to Jason, feel free to throw it in the chat. But we will start with a question from Carol Graham. So she states, what kinds of systems slash groups within communities provided organizational information and inspiration to continue to push back against these injustices?
I'm sorry, repeat that for me.
Yeah. What kinds of systems slash groups within communities provided organizational information and inspiration to continue to push back against these injustices?
That's easy. I mean, first you think of is the church. Black church was always there for information, for pushback. People in the church there. The NAACP, of course, ACLU was part of that, and just everyday people, really. During the shutdown of education in Farmville, Virginia. Uh, there was so much, too much to tell in, of course, short time. But during that same time period where education was shut down, the white students opened up a private school. Okay, and so a lot of black people had to go out away from home. But then also churches, they took up that slack. It kept the education going, and that way, when the schools opened, there was minimal, if any, lack of curriculum or educational growth. And so, just the community themselves as a unit. Um, there was one clip in there that always gets me talking about the paddling of children. Can you imagine the amount of love and trust within a community where you know that if your child is not acting right outside of the home, that they can be corrected by somebody else because you know that it's done out of love? I mean, come on.
Absolutely. No, I think that definitely showcases the importance of community. And I think a lot of times, particularly even, today, that we don't see that same type of community center of the schools, right? A lot of it is around testing and various things like that, but not really community and kind of building, the people that will eventually go back into your community, right, and continue to build it up as well, right? Absolutely. And the people are asking about the references when the recording is posted on under past webinars. And this is there'll be the link for that. Once the recording is uploaded, I can also then take those references that you showed on that last slide and I can post that on there as well. So that absolutely will be up there as well.
Okay.
Wonderful. Does anyone else have any questions for Jason? And yeah, those resources will get put up there under past webinars along with the recording within the next couple of weeks, excuse me. All right. Well, I do have a question for you,
All
Jason.
right.
Um, were there any stories or patterns in the oral histories that shifted your own perspective on desegregation and its effects?
Yeah, like what actually drew me to this was my parents. They went to school during segregation. And I used to hear stories about the love of their school. They have a class reunion that they've been having forever that just includes everybody who ever went to that school. Uh, just that camaraderie and realizing that my parents had something that I would never have, and that was being taught by all Black teachers. I can only imagine, I mean, my whole school career, I can probably count my Black teachers on one hand, from K through 12. And then it made me wonder everybody's always talking about what's going on with the school system, what's going on with the educational system. And we realize, well, if you remove the best and brightest, the most educated, the most experienced, the most caring group of persons from any industry, what do
Mhm.
you think is going to happen? It's going to collapse. It's going to fall. It's going to falter. It's going to go down. And I think that's what happened when there was one instance where black male principal lost his job to the white mailman. No, milkman. It was a milkman coming from the book. No, somebody with no educational experience in education. Just small things like that. And so realizing that what's wrong with the educational system and why we're now trying to entice black people to come into the education system is because we let everybody go in the first place. And like I say, when you lose that core, that center, that nuclei of any group, something's going to happen. It's not going to go away, and it's not going to go in a positive sense. It's going to go in a negative sense.
Absolutely. We got questions flying now. Okay. Does President Eisenhower get any credit for using the military to escort and protect Black students and try to enforce Brown versus Board?
Why do we need credit for doing the right thing? I think that's a lot of the problem why we can't grow right now is because we're looking for credit to do the right thing. We're looking for awards to say, hey, I'm against what's wrong, when that should be the norm. So I definitely understand the question. And so, yes, there's credit to be given because he did the right thing. But why do we celebrate when somebody does the right thing? I mean, it's always good, but that should be the norm. That should be what's going on all the time, doing the right thing. It shouldn't have been a situation where we had to have somebody escorted into a public school system, somebody trying to learn. So, yeah, give credit where credit is due, not when we just willy-nilly want to give somebody credit for doing the right thing. Credit where credit is due.
Writing a book on this based on those fascinating oral histories.
I'm sorry.
Have you ever thought about writing a book on the fascinating oral histories?
Every day.
Well, maybe this is your
Yeah,
push. This
I
is your
think about
push.
it. Think about it every day. That's the problem. Just thinking about it. It's not a goal to us putting on paper, but no, it's definitely something in the works. But there's so much more work to be done before something like that can occur. I mean, it's just so much work. And then you also have to think about, the privacy of the narrators that you give too. Uh, that's why you don't find a lot of full or histories available because you have to take time, go through it because you don't want anybody to incriminate themselves in any type of situation where you're asking somebody to give freely of themselves.
Absolutely. And then we have another question. So in second grade in 1967 in Memphis, Tennessee, I had a Black teacher. She was the best teacher I ever had. When were Black teachers rehired into white schools?
It's happening now. Yeah, I mean, it just like I said, it's still happening now. We're still trying to get back to where we were. Um, like I say, I mean, you heard Mr. Lane. She was able to make that transition even after desegregation. So, I'm not saying all. There were some black teachers that were able to, transition. But I can only imagine the types of politicking that might have gone on to be able to keep your job, or just imagine how good you have to be in order to keep your job. Like that one lady said, we were told we have to be 100 times better than white people. That's something else I found during these interviews. A lot of these tropes for our black communities, they span the nation. I was always taught you're going to have to be twice as good to get half as much as white people. So when I see, a black person that's in a position like, I know they're good. I know that they've done everything twice over in order to keep that spot. So uh, when exactly, I mean, it was just an ongoing thing. Even when I was in high school and college, there were so many scholarships trying to get black students to want to go into education. It was a resurgence of that. Uh, but yeah, I hope that adds some clarity to your question.
I want to get to these last two questions before we wrap up. But Jason, do you feel the same consequences will happen in the US today with all the onslaught of DEI?
Well, first, let's call it what it is: diversity, equity, and inclusion. When you start saying DEI, it's like a buzzword. So I want, we have to start saying what it is instead of putting these initials to it. But with diversity, you see how I feel about diversity. Diversity is an achievement. There's a difference between progress and achievement. We've had plenty of Black achievement, but achievement happens in spite of progress. And so, do I feel that there'll be a resurgence? I hope so. But with things happening like teaching degrees not being professional degrees, and there's still this push in order to keep certain people out of certain spaces in certain educational fields. You got vouchers for private schools, and when you have to have a voucher to go to somewhere, you have to really wonder if they really want you there. I don't know, but we shall see.
Yeah. And then last but not least, we have why was there a delay in implementing the ruling of Brown v. Board? Was it the states or the federal government that delayed the ruling?
Both. The federal government offered very little, if any, protection. Like I say, look up the word deliberate, you'll see what it actually means. Uh, they wanted to maintain, in my opinion now, just from my research, they wanted to maintain the integrity of the states, didn't want to lose constituents, especially in the South. Historically, even in antebellum South has always had been a economic force for these states. Uh, Same thing went on. And so, you know, that's a hard one to, yeah, that's a good one. But
Their hand in the pot.
yeah, exactly. I mean, so
I want to say thank you again, Jason. This was amazing, and based on the chat, and I'm sure everybody agrees that this has been a very engaging and enlightening presentation that you gave to us. And I also want to throw out in the chat a resource for 6th through 12th grade classrooms that can be utilized to explore this very topic. And there are additional resources that we have on our NCHE website as well that you can also explore based on various US and world history topics. But because we are talking about Brown versus Board, that this particular resource is the most fitting for that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and I appreciate you all, and have a great evening.
thanks everyone. Y'all have a good one.